Hey there, fellow explorers of the silver screen. Welcome to Fact Flow channel, where we dive into the captivating world of history, films, facts, and storytelling. Today, we've got an ocean-sized tale for you all about the making of one of the most iconic movies of all time, James Cameron's Titanic. James Cameron's vision for Titanic was as grand as the ship itself, but bringing that vision to life was no easy feat. It required immense dedication, attention to detail, and a passion for storytelling that would stand the test of time. And before we delve deeper into the cinematic marvel that is Titanic, take a moment to ensure you never miss out on our latest explorations. Hit that subscribe button below, and join our community of fellow enthusiasts. When James Cameron started shooting Titanic, he was far from the last director in Hollywood. His filmography already included two parts of the cult Terminator, Aliens, True Lies, and other blockbusters, against the background of which the film about the fleeting romance of two lovers on an unsinkable ocean liner, and its fatal collision with an iceberg seems alien. The director himself recalls with a smile how he came with this idea to the management of Fox Studios. So, a 3-hour film about love? They told him. Great, we love it, but will it be anything like Terminator? Chases, shootouts, fights? No, there won't be anything like that, Cameron replied, to the producer's surprise. This is now we know about the 11 Oscars and the world record for collections, which 12 years after the premiere of Titanic, James Cameron himself will break his own avatar. But in the second half of the 90s, the idea of this film seemed incredibly risky. Where did it come from in the head of the director of sci-fi action films about aliens and robots from the future, and how it turned into a recognized masterpiece of the film industry? Released in 1989, James Cameron's The Abyss is a little-known film, unlike his other hits. It didn't pay off at the box office, the mass audience didn't like it much, except that the American Film Academy awarded it an Oscar for Best Visual Effects. But it is noteworthy that in preparation for shooting The Abyss, James Cameron consulted with Professor of Oceanology and underwater archaeologist Robert Ballard. It was he who in 1985 discovered the remains of the Titanic and found that the sinking of the ship broke into two parts, although previously it was believed that the liner went to the bottom entirely. Before meeting Ballard, James only knew of the Titanic that it was a very large ship that sank. Had it not been for this acquaintance, perhaps Cameron would never have seen Ballard's documentary The Truth About the Titanic, made for the National Geographic Channel. The film made a big impression on the director. He took a notebook and wrote, "To make a story tied to modern times, what is happening in our time intersects with the memories of the surviving hero, a mystery or main storyline is needed." Cameron had 10 years of intense filming ahead of him, The Abyss, the second Terminator, True Lies, and all the while he was still thinking about the sinking of the Titanic. And when a friend of the director and specialist in underwater photography Al Giddings invited James to the premiere of his video film Titanic, Treasure of the Deep, he decided to move from reflection to action. Cameron asked Giddings to introduce him to Russian oceanographer Anatoly Sigalovich. By that time the director had already heard about the Russian submersibles Mir, which had high maneuverability and the ability to work at extreme depths, and did not see the future film without full-scale filming of the wreckage of the Titanic. After a short telephone conversation with a surprised Sigalovich, Giddings and Cameron flew to Moscow and met him in person. Professor Sigalovich recalls this event in his memoirs, We Fly With Him from Moscow to Kaliningrad. James tells us about his completely new creative ideas. We are tired of different film focuses, computer graphics, endless rallies. In short, all that on the screen's more than in excess. I want to create a truly human film, to show the characters of the people who then sailed on the Titanic. And of course, with the help of underwater footage and special effects, it is necessary to show the scale of the tragedy that happened to the Titanic, which with its grandeur, beauty and comfort overshadowed the minds of the people who worked on it and who by their qualifications, and by virtue of their psychology were not ready for the operation of such a giant ship, which gained the reputation of unsinkable. It is necessary, finally, for people to realize that the Titanic was a symbol of its time. Of course, it's not easy to translate everything into a feature film, James Cameron told me. However, there are appropriate directorial techniques and technical possibilities. And, of course, of great importance will be full-scale deep-sea filming from your underwater vehicles. We will try to organize an underwater studio at a depth of 3,800 meters. I understood these words of the director only 3 years later, when we began to work together. Segalovich was anticipating exciting and interesting shooting. A year passed, then the second, but the matter did not move beyond the rare negotiations. The usual case for planned film projects that do not yet exist even in the form of synopsis. But how could an outstanding oceanologist know these nuances? Segalovich's patience ran out, and he sent Cameron an ultimatum by fax: if you want to make a film, it's now or never. We are alive, in good shape, and on the mere apparatuses, which are themselves made at the level of art. We can create a real film underwater, which Hollywood has never seen before. The answer had to wait a week. In November 1994, Cameron called Segalovic and said that he was ready to start shooting. At this point, the director already imagined the plot of the future film as the story of Romeo and Juliet on board the Titanic, because the lovers had to be young enough that one of them lived to this day. It is for this reason that Leonardo DiCaprio, who played Romeo in Romeo plus Juliet a year earlier, and Kate Winslet will be selected for the roles of the main characters in the future. After that, there was the very conversation with the management of the studio's 20th Century Fox, with which our story began. Cameron promised to lay the budget of the future film in $100 million, less than that of Terminator 2, but asked for an advance of $2 million to organize an underwater expedition. Studio bosses gave the go-ahead. The 23rd of August, 1995 research vessel Akademik Mstislav Keldysh, with 2 bathyscaphes Mir on board, arrives in Halifax, where the crew is joined by James Cameron and his crew. The director wasted no time. Together with his brother Mike, they developed a unique overboard film camera capable of operating at pressures of over 400 atmospheres. For this purpose, a special cylindrical cover 91 centimeters long and 25.4 centimeters in diameter made of durable metal with a 10.16 centimeters thick, borosilicate illuminated dome capable of withstanding enormous pressure was used. To film the interior of the Titanic, one of the bathyscaphes was fitted with a small-sized remote-controlled module, which the film crew dubbed Snoop Dogg. In English, this phrase means bloodhound or weasel. The submersibles were also equipped with powerful searchlights capable of working at great depths. Every minute of filming was worth its weight in gold. Artist John Bruno, a friend of Cameron's who did the visual effects in The Abyss, drew detailed storyboards of each future scene, but it wasn't enough. Studio Digital Domain, one of the founders of which was James Cameron, created a detailed model of the remains of the Titanic, in a scale of 1/33. The work was done by the director's friends Scott Ross and Stan Winston. This 3.65-meter-long structure greatly simplified communication between the American film crew and the Russian crew of the Keldysh, most of whom did not speak English. Each movement was rehearsed using miniature models of the bathyscaphes with built-in lenses and torches. All that remained was to repeat these actions at a depth of 3,750 meters. In 1995, digital cameras were out of the question, and filming was done on film. The camera was capable of holding 152.5 meters of film, with no underwater recharging capability. Double perforation and shooting at the rate of 14 to 16 frames per second allowed to shoot 15 minutes per one dive, which lasted at least 15 hours, 2 hours down, from 10 to 12 hours of work near the wreckage and 2.5 hours of ascent up. In this case, the crew of the bathyscaphe, without exaggeration, risked their lives if the borosilicate glass protecting the camera could not withstand the pressure, which at such a depth is 2,948.5 kilograms per square inch, and therefore the load on the glass with a diameter of 21.59 centimeters was 498,960 kilograms. The water flow would not only crumple it into a thin pancake, but would have knocked out the lid of the cylinder in which the camera was hidden. The kinetic energy of that lid would have been enough to punch the bathyscaphe through. Former engineer Mike Cameron told his brother, "Just in case, don't let the rear end of the cylinder be pointed at the bathyscaphe." To which James replied, "Mike, the rear end will always be pointed over the bathyscaphe, as the camera will always be pointed from it." That's the whole idea. The first dive proved to be a failure. Predictions about visibility were not confirmed, and instead of the 30 meters of visibility underwater that Cameron had hoped for, he had to deal with only 10 meters. It is extremely difficult to work in such an environment. James decided to install a wide-angle lens on the camera and shoot from a closer distance. In the future, Cameron will tell about the preparation and the shooting itself as follows. For each dive we prepared as for the landing on the moon, we spent hours practicing every movement on miniature models of bathyscaphs. Everything was recorded by video cameras, diagrams were drawn, charts were made. Teams of bathyscaphs received a detailed storyboard of the upcoming shooting. Of course, every time at the bottom everything went wrong. For example, visibility is limited in the already tiny porthole, and the navigator has to steer the 18-ton vehicle through rough, unpredictable underwater currents and pitch blackness. The only thing missing from the recipe for 100% enjoyment here is a mad director forcing the two submarine units into close proximity to each other and to a mountain of metal entangled in steel cables. It wasn't until the second dive that I really grasped the catastrophe. I suddenly realized that I was on the deck of the Titanic. Time has disappeared. Over there is the davit from which the No. 1 rescue boat with Lucy and Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon on board has just departed. This davit is later used to launch the No. 3 folding boat, but not before Bruce Ismay steps through it, simultaneously stepping into immortality and infamy, becoming the iconic character who escaped from the Titanic to the screams of the 1,500 passengers of the sinking ship. I literally saw Captain Smith bidding farewell to his crew, while the wave was already lapping the captain's bridge. I also saw the first mate William Murdoch, in those last seconds perfectly aware of the fact that he does not have time to change the course of the ship, that the death of thousands of people in the icy abyss is inevitable, but did not leave his vain attempts. During this filming, James Cameron managed what no underwater archaeologist before him, not even the legendary Robert Ballard. He sent a guided vehicle with a camera inside the Titanic and was able to film its flooded interiors. It was only on the second attempt. During the first attempt, a chip fell into the camera, and the Snoop Dogg had to be equipped with a protective net. Shooting had to be very slow, the slightest movement of the device raised a heap of mud, and then the operator had to wait for it to settle, and it would be possible to move at least another meter. It turned out that Ballard had been wrong in his assertion that the mollusks had long ago eaten all the wood. In the depths of the ship, there was surviving woodwork and furniture. For 12 dives, each of which lasted more than 10 hours, James Cameron spent on the Titanic more than any of its passengers. The director said that after the second dive, he was overcome with longing and sadness. He was there when it all happened, and the fateful transatlantic liner went from an abstract legend to a reality he could literally touch. "I'm not ashamed to admit, I cried," James Cameron will say, recalling the shooting, "after I saw the wreckage of the real Titanic. It was clear to me that I had no right to slip up on anything. When the Russians and I finished underwater filming, I asked everyone to gather on deck. Before that, we had filmed all night and all day, over 17 hours. People were exhausted, but everyone gathered on the bow of the ship and we launched a wreath on which we wrote, 'In memory of the passengers and crew of the Titanic.' Our film is a cinematic wreath to these people." Thus ended the underwater filming. But that was only the beginning of the journey. Polite, positive and appreciative of friendship, James Cameron assembled a team of top-notch professionals to realize his dream. This producer John Landor, with whom Cameron made True Lies, the president of the Lightstorm Entertainment Ray Sancini, who worked with James on the second Terminator, production designer Peter Lamont and special effects coordinator Thomas Fisher, who had time to work on many previous films of the director. Joined the work and visual effects studio Digital Domain headed by Robert Legato, nominated for an Oscar for Apollo 13. Historical consultants were also on hand, including Titanic connoisseurs writer-historian Don Lynch and artist Ken Marshall. Underwater filming was over, but there was still a lot of work to be done. Thanks for tuning into this part of our Titanic saga. But don't wander too far, because in our next installment, we'll be diving even deeper into the untold stories behind the making of this cinematic masterpiece. Until then, keep those eyes peeled and those notifications on, because you won't want to miss a single moment of the excitement. See you in the next chapter. As we reach the end of this tale, don't forget to subscribe for more riveting stories. Keep the adventure alive by hitting that subscribe button. Until next time, stay tuned and stay curious.